Please turn to page 184 for Stage 10, Informative Explanatory Writing. We've reached the essay level. That means that we have an introductory paragraph in which there's going to be a hook and a thesis statement, the body full of main idea paragraphs to support the thesis statement, and a conclusion paragraph. This stage depends on all the skills that we taught in the previous stages of writing. If students are unable to independently write at the Stage 7 and Stage 8 level, they are not ready for Stage 10. Stage 10 requires that students have all the skills from sequencing to describing to categorizing information. You typically don't stick with one type of organization. As you go through the different parts of the essay with me, you will see sometimes we're in the description mode. Sometimes we may be sequencing, sometimes we may be categorizing. The information in the essay will dictate how we need to organize it. If they have the sequencing, describing, and categorizing skills mastered, then they are ready for the essay level. Let's go through all the pages in this section so you can see the tools and charts. On page 184, when we go back and start the lesson, we'll begin here with a chant to introduce to the students what they will be learning and all the parts of an essay. On page 185 is your at a glance teacher directions. Now, I also want to let you know that students, when they hit Stage 10, could use this direction page. You could Xerox this off and give students a copy of this so that when they independently write their own essays, they have this page to follow. Students at this level can follow along with this at-a-glance page. They've developed enough in their writing and are mature enough writers that this will make sense to them. In the Informative Explanatory Tools section of your videos, you can download an 8.5 by 14 colorful chart that displays all the directions for you to put up on your wall to give to students, or you can give them this black and white copy. Let's go to the next page to see what else we have in this section. On page 186, we begin first with the checklist. This checklist is for you to use to analyze your students' work. And this checklist is separated into 3 parts: content and organization, sentences, and mechanics, with all the listed elements that are necessary at the Stage 10 essay level. I also have on this page the brainstorm. If you did not see the brainstorm video, I highly suggest that you go back and see how we brainstormed information about a unit of study. This particular brainstorm is what we're going to use in order to write our essay in this Stage 10 lesson today. Also below are the steps to follow in order to write the essay. I took the previous page, the at-a-glance page, and I shrunk it down here so that you could refer to it as we were going through the lesson. And that's because on the facing page, you have a sample planner. This is an organizer that has been completed. Notice, if I put my little stick person, we have our introduction, body, and conclusion. I want to show you here that in our introduction, we have SS light bulb for our thesis statement, and there's a box here. If we need background, a description and background information about our subject before we go in to the body of the paragraph, this essay is going to be about flowers and pollination. If the reader does not know what the female and male parts of the female and male organs of a flower, if they don't know those parts and understand what those parts are, then we need to give a description of them before we go in and tell the main ideas of self-pollination and cross-pollination. So the description box that was put up here in the introduction, that's optional. That's only used if you need to give a description or background of the subject, if the reader needs that in order to understand the information that's going to be reported in this essay. So we have our introduction, and here is our body. We had 2 main idea boxes to tell about the thesis statement. The body does not have a certain number of boxes. The body has the number of main idea boxes needed to tell about or explain that thesis statement. And down on the bottom, we have our conclusion. What's missing on this organizer is the hook and the snappy ending. I always do that separately. I want both the hook and the snappy ending to be almost like a ribbon that wraps up a present, where they connect together. They have some sort of a connection together so that you keep that style of both the hook and the snappy ending. I also find that if you plan the hook at the start of your paper before you even get into your thesis statement, that students start writing off topic because they haven't even formed their thesis statement and they're writing a hook to grab their reader. So what I suggest is that you write your introduction with only the thesis statement. If you need a description, do it. Body, main ideas. Conclusion, go back and add to the essay a hook and a snappy ending, but prepare those separately on a separate sheet of paper because you probably won't have room, and you can make that connection with the hook and the snappy ending so that you keep that style and that they connect together, almost like wrapping up a present. And when we look at our hook, we'll write down our hook at the top of the paper, and then at the bottom we'll write our snappy ending. Later, when we go to write this out, we have our hook and snappy ending paper right next to our organizer, which has the rest of the introduction, body, and conclusion. Let's go to the next page so I can show you that I have some tools for hooks and snappy endings. On page 188 are two charts. One is for hooks and one is for a snappy ending. Students can take out these charts so that they can utilize them to help them create their hook and snappy ending. When they're creating that, again, they create it on a separate sheet of paper so that it can tie into their paper, and it also is done after the entire paper is planned so they don't go off topic. Let's go to the next page. The whole purpose for graphics are for you, the writer, to decide after you've written out your entire paper. So what I mean by that is you have written your paper and revised and edited your paper. At the time of publishing, what you need to do is decide, when I write out this paper, do I also need to include graphics? And graphics are there to aid the reader to understand your information at an even deeper level. So a student, when they finish writing their paper, they need to go back and identify, are there any difficult parts in this paper? And if I find any difficult parts, then I need to add graphics. And when they add graphics, they have to decide, well, what kind of graphic am I going to use? And down below, I have some graphic charts. Now in our tools section, there's a tool video where I will explain all the tools that I've been showing you in this section in detail. So when you're ready to use graphics and want to know the purpose of every graphic, go to the videos and the tools, and I will give you a detailed description of all those different types of graphics and their purpose. In this Stage 10 lesson, the essay that we wrote about pollinization and cross-pollinization had a description of a flower in it. And after writing the whole essay, what you will see here is a graphic. This graphic is actually a graphic used in the final product in this sample lesson at Stage 10, and that is a diagram. Now, this diagram was put into the published piece of writing because in the text, the description of a flower was very high level and may be difficult for the reader to understand without some sort of a visual aid. A purpose of a diagram is to help your reader create a visual picture of what you're trying to create with words. And one other thing, also to help understand content vocabulary. So when you have a diagram, many times what you have is a picture of what you're describing in your essay, as well as the vocabulary words that you're using in your essay labeled on the diagram. So when the reader is reading, they can read, look at the picture to help them understand and create that visual of what you are trying to create in your writing, as well as when they come to a difficult content word, go to that diagram, see that content word, and then try to understand what it means by looking at the diagram. Your graphics have a purpose and they are put into a paper to help your reader comprehend your text at an even deeper level. And this is our final 2 pages, and this is the sample published essay at a stage 10 from this lesson today. Notice this essay has the diagram included because the reader needs this diagram to understand a description that is in this writing and the content vocabulary words. So we have on both pages the written example of a stage 10 essay. After reviewing all the pages in stage 10, we're going to go back to page 184 to begin the lesson where I will walk through the chant and then we will walk through the steps of how to teach students a stage 10 informative explanatory essay. On page 184, we have our chant. When we're presenting this chant to the students, we say to the students, boys and girls, this lesson will teach you the steps of how to write an informative explanatory essay. An informative explanatory essay has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Oh, that's our organizer, where we have 1, 2 lines. And the top line is what, everybody? The introduction. What's the middle part of that organizer? The body. What's the bottom? The conclusion. So it's the same as when we were in the paragraphs. Excellent. So we're taking what we already know and we're going to learn even more. We're going to expand on that. This is great. We're not having to learn everything new. We're just building. Excellent. Let's go back and say it again. An informational essay has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Let's go to the introduction. When we're writing an introduction, what do we need to do when we first start writing out our introduction? We need to, let's pretend like we have a fishing rod and hook in the reader. We need to grab their interest because if we don't, then they will have no desire to want to read our paper and they'll walk away. Or if it was in a book, they would close the book. So what are we doing, everybody? We're going to hook in the reader to grab their interest. And after we grab their interest, we're going to tell a little bit more. We're going to start off with some sort of a general observation. So we have a hook, and then we're going to have a general observation. Let's put GO there. And what's a general observation? Well, if we're giving information, and today we're talking about flowers, and how flowers reproduce their seeds through pollination, if we're doing that, we're going to hook in our reader, get their interest, say something interesting, and that interest will either make them emotional or curious. So they may be angry, they may laugh, you may say something that is silly, you may say something that is upsetting, you may say something that's scary, you may say something that will pique their interest. So they want to know more, an interesting fact, something that they never knew before, like, oh, I didn't know that, and they want to keep reading. So we're hooking in the reader and we're creating either some sort of an emotion or a curiosity to pull them in. After we hook in the reader, what do we need to do? Have a general observation. When you tell about a problem, an event, an issue, a trend, an idea, a rule, or some sort of claim that some expert or someone made that makes this information important. So this general observation is going to provide the importance to the reader. So we have a hook to grab our reader's attention. And we're either going to, let's put a heart here, a hook to grab them in that will cause an emotional reaction, or let's put some eyeballs here for pique their curiosity. After that, we'll give a general observation. We're going to tell them about an event, a trend, an issue, a rule, some sort of information that makes this important, that makes what we're writing about in this paper important. After we hook in the reader, then what do we have to do? Then we have to give the thesis statement. And what's the thesis statement? It's a fancy word for the big idea. So our thesis statement is what, everybody? The big idea. And guess what? It's SS light bulb. It's the same thing. And SS light bulb is the same thing in the thesis statement. Now, teachers, in stage 9, The thesis statement was taught to the students before they come to stage 10. So I'm using this as a review to say, oh, we already learned a thesis statement. We've been practicing how to write the thesis statements, so we know that also. We're going to say that to the students. I highly suggest that the students work at stage 9 and write many thesis statements and get in practice of that before they jump to stage 10. So we have SS light bulb is our thesis statement. We've learned that and we've been writing some thesis statements. That's the big idea of the essay. And today we're going to use a thesis statement that we already formed before in order to start our essay. All right, so we're going to build on what we've already been learning. This is so great. So what do we have so far, everybody? We have our introduction, and in our introduction, what are we going to do? Hook in the reader and provide some sort of general observation of why this information is important. And then we're going to present the thesis statement, the big idea of the whole essay. The next thing I want to show you is right here, and it says optional. That is a description. We have to go back to our subject and we have to ask, before I go any further in my essay, I have to ask, does my reader know enough about the subject? Can they visualize the subject? Do they have a deep enough understanding about the subject in order for me to tell this information? So let me give you another example. What if I was writing a report about volcanoes and how they create and devastate landforms? Well, I probably, in my introduction, need to give a description of all the parts and functions of a volcano, a descriptive piece of writing that is going to provide the reader with the background they need about a volcano, so when I tell how volcanoes devastate and create landforms, they will understand that information because they know what a volcano is at that deep level through a description. So I'm going to put an eyeball like this on the side of the thesis statement just to show that's optional. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. So we have our introduction, all of our parts. Let's go back, and when we say hook in the reader, we now know it means a general observation. We're just going to say hook in the reader, but we know that means to hook in the reader, presenting a general observation about the importance of this information. Let's go back and say the whole thing. An informational essay has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In the introduction, the author is going to hook in the reader, then introduce the thesis statement. Optional. Add a description if you need to know more about the subject. So we have our introduction. Let's go to the next part. Body. The body. What's the body? So we have our body here, the middle. We know what the body is from our paragraphs, but now we're adding more to our body. What is in our body? This part has main idea paragraphs that are filled with details, all about the thesis statement. So what does our body have now? It's going to have paragraphs in it. And the paragraphs, what do they have? Details. What's the job of all these main idea paragraphs? To tell about the thesis statement. Here's the big thing that we need to understand now. We need to figure out the number of main idea paragraphs. So when we say our thesis statement, we have to then say, all right, here's my thesis statement. What information do I need to tell about or explain about my thesis statement in the body of my paragraph? And those will be the number of paragraphs because those will be main ideas. Then you would have a box in your organizer. So let's say there were 3 main ideas. Then you would put 2 lines to have 3 boxes. You would then label the box, each box with a main idea. Then below that are going to be all the details. So we have our main idea paragraphs, and the number of them is going to determine the number of boxes. But here's the next thing. Which box do you put first, second, or third? This is where we're going to ask, do those boxes, those main ideas need to be in order or they don't have to be in order? So that means sequencing or categorizing. So look so far what's happened in our essay. Up at the top, we add a description. In the middle, the boxes, which are main ideas, may have to be placed in order, or maybe they don't have to be put in order. That's sequencing and categorizing. Let's go to the details. Details are going to be in those main idea paragraphs. What do we need for those details? The details will be describe, list and draw, and back it up. Those are our choices of details. We say draw. Oh, that means that we have to write a description for our details. List and draw means, so I'll put L and D here for list and draw, means that first of all, we're going to make a list. So if we make a list, that means that it could be in order or it doesn't have to be in order. So what do we have there? We have sequencing, or the list is categorizing. And when we make that list, we could add descriptions. Or details could be just a description on its own. The whole main idea box is just a description. One item that you're going to label the parts and describe the function of the parts. List and draw means that there's information that you have to sequence out, or there's many items of information that you need to list out. And within those items, you may need to have a description embedded in that. All those skills that we had learned separately in separate paragraphs, and at this point, depending on whether we're in the introduction, deciding on a description, deciding in the body how to organize the main ideas, or when we're writing out our details, deciding if we're going to describe, sequence, categorize, embed descriptions in that list of sequencing or categorizing. And the last of the details is back it up. And that's where we're going to give an example, a statistic, an anecdote, another fact that will back up the information we're giving. The body is using all that we have learned in the previous stages as almost a palette where I have information that I need to tell my audience, and I may need to describe it, categorize it, I may need to sequence it, and I'm just using whatever tool that will best help explain or report about that information. And finally, at the bottom, what do we have? Our conclusion. And that conclusion is going to repeat the thesis statement, but of course, using different words, and end with a snap. And what is the snap? We want to connect the snap back to the hook, have that style, but also leave our reader with the importance of this information. And that may be a new idea, some sort of an emotion that they're feeling about this information. And that may lead the reader to a new idea that they never thought about after you presented this information. Or it may present them with some sort of an emotion where they may get excited or angry or happy. You're presenting something that's going to cause an emotional reaction so that it ties into why is this so important. We have all of our elements, an introduction, body, and conclusion. Let's go back and say our entire chant. The informational essay has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. The introduction hooks in the reader and introduces the thesis statement. Optional. Only use a description if you need to describe the subject. Body is full of main idea paragraphs that are full of details that tell all about the thesis statement. Conclusion. Repeat that thesis statement, but use different words and end with a snap. There we have all the parts of our essay. And if you have gone through all my stages of writing, you will see how this is really the culminating stage where we are taking all the skills and putting them together. One last point that I need to make is this is an informative explanatory essay, but when we learned about information, I used the word idea. Idea was inform, and when you inform, what you're doing is you're telling about reporting the information. So notice you're just reporting the information. There's nothing else other than you've learned information and now you're reporting about it. It's at that knowledge level. And what do we use for an organizer? The categories organizer. This is what we did when we were in the paragraph level. D is describe. That's when we need to describe our subject so our reader understands and has enough background about the subject. That means you're describing the parts of the subject, and when you're describing the parts of that subject, you're telling the function of the parts. So there's our describe. Explain is when you are sequencing. You're explaining the information. In this essay format at stage 10, that's what we are doing. We are at the knowledge level. We are not going to that analysis level. That'll be stage 11. That's the A, where you analyze. Analyze is compare, contrast, or cause and effect. That's stage 11, and that's where you're going into deeper thinking about the information. This essay level is for students to write multiple paragraphs at that knowledge level where they are going to inform, describe, or explain, or use a combination of those different reasons for the information. Stage 10 is when they are writing those multiple paragraphs, but they are at the knowledge level. This is essential that they master this level so that they show they understand the information, and they also show that they can write with endurance and they can keep focused and stay on topic when their papers have more and more text. Let's go to the next page so I can walk you through the steps and the tools that you will need when you're teaching this lesson. This knowledge level is stage 10. And then when you go to analyze, compare, contrast, cause, and effect, that's stage 11. You will teach both stages 10 and 11 at the same time. As a matter of fact, if I was working in a stage 7 and 8 advanced paragraph, then I can jump to stage 11 and just teach at the paragraph level, compare, contrast, cause, and effect. When I'm teaching those, they may be at a high level of scaffolding, but I want, even from the beginning of the year, my students to have that ability to write, and it would just be at the paragraph level. If I'm writing at the paragraph level, stages 7 and 8, then I would write at the paragraph level at stage 11, simultaneously. So I may be in a unit of study. I may be in a unit of study where we are writing stages 7 and 8 advanced paragraphs, where we're going to write information about what we've learned in our unit of study. And that is our know it level, where I'm showing I know the information. Then I would jump up to the stage 11, but I would stay just at a paragraph level, where we would do an analyze it piece of writing, where we would do a cause and effect, compare or contrast, where I would do a cause and effect, where the students would write a cause and effect or a compare or contrast paragraph about the information that they've learned. But I would probably be giving them high levels of scaffolding so that they could have exposure to this thinking and this type of writing. By the time I get up to stage 10, then what I'll probably be doing is working at stage 10, where we write know-it essays. I know the information, so I'm going to write a know-it essay, which is stage 10, where I'm going to inform, tell about, or explain the information. It's just a knowledge level essay. And at the same time, so after we finish that essay, we may jump to a analyze it piece of writing, where we would go to stage 11 and maybe write a compare or a contrast or a cause and effect essay. So notice, if I'm writing paragraphs, then if I'm writing paragraphs at the knowledge level, then my analyze, compare, contrast, cause, and effect would be paragraphs. But I still would do both. And when I'm writing essays, then that stage 11 becomes an essay as well. Let's go ahead to the next page so you can see at stage 10 what are the steps and tools you need for your lessons. As I walk through the steps, I want to write down the page numbers and show you the different tools that we'll use in the lesson. First of all, in order to organize all these, what I suggest is that you get 3 file folders. Label 1, Introduction. And in the introduction, we'll have our hooks and our big idea. That way, When you open up the file folder, you have your hook and big idea tools right inside. Then you have the body, and in the body, we'll have all the tools in here for writing details, main idea sentences, advanced main idea sentences, as well as transitions and graphics. And finally, a conclusion folder where you will have my tools for helping repeat the big idea and for snappy endings. When you're following the Stage 10 steps, you will have your organizer where you will have the 2 lines where you draw the 2 lines across the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper in the landscape position. The top section is the introduction, middle is the body, and the bottom is the conclusion. Let me erase that and go back up and show you. Here's our directions for the introduction. Here's our directions for the body, and then the directions for the conclusion. The introduction is where we're going to write our thesis statement. In Stage 1, we have our thesis statement using our SS light bulb secret formula. Refer back to Stage 9 for all the steps and watch the video that shows explicitly how to form thesis statements. Also, you'll see here where it says describe. Describe is descriptive writing. So this means that, I'll put an equal sign here, that if we need to have a description about a subject of our entire paper, then we will have a description. That's where we'll write a definition, and then we will label the parts of a drawing and tell the function of the parts. So we have a description, which is optional, and that's our descriptive writing. And that is from Stage 8, where we've learned all the steps of how to write a description. Again, this is optional only if we need to in our secret formula: setting, subject, big idea. Do we need to have background, a description of this subject before we go into the body? Let's go to the body. In the body, we have our main idea paragraphs, and we have to organize those main idea paragraphs. Either they're going to be where there doesn't have to be a specific order or where they have to be in order. That's why we learned how to categorize and sequence. So those are going to be our doesn't have to be in order or order cards, which were on page 155. Then we go to our main idea paragraphs. We need to have transitions. On page 213 is a transition sheet. And you'll love that sheet because it's organized with transition words that are either sequence words, categorizing words, description words. They are words that you can use while you're writing your essay or going from one main idea paragraph to the next, and they're organized in the way that the students have learned how to organize by sequencing, categorizing, or describing. I also have some advanced main idea transitions. That means that when you go from one main idea paragraph to another, you could use these transitions that I have on page 213, but if you want your students to kick up their writing to even a higher level, these are advanced transitions. They're very high level and sophisticated, and the perfect tool that you can give students who are ready to take their writing to an even higher level. Those transitions are on page 218 and 219. And then we have to write our main idea sentence and the details for our main idea sentences. So I have a card that shows how to begin a main idea sentence, and also a details card to show all the different types of details that you could have in your main idea paragraphs. All of the cards, because these also come with information pages, these cards and everything that deals with the main idea sentences and the detail sentences are on pages 214 through 217. And the final section of your paper is the conclusion, S light bulb, as well as hooks and snappy endings. The tools that I have that can help with hooks and snappy endings can be found on pages 220, 221. I also put a note here, graphics, on pages 224 and 225 are my chart that display all the different types of graphics, if necessary, that the students need to add to their paper in order to enhance the comprehension of their readers. Let's turn to the next page. We had our brainstorm out. We have our steps available for our students to follow. And on the following page, you will actually see a completed organizer. We are going to look at our brainstorm in order to form our thesis statement and start filling in our organizer with all the main idea paragraphs and details necessary to explain that thesis statement and finally end with a conclusion. Let's get started. We have our blank sheet of paper in the landscape position. We've drawn 2 lines across this paper, so the top section has room for an introduction, the middle is the body, and the bottom is the conclusion. When we look at our directions, what do we have? An introduction, a body, and a conclusion. We're going to start up at the introduction. What does the introduction say on our directions? It says, step 1, thesis statement. That's the big idea of the essay. And right after that, it also says, describe the subject. That's going to be optional. The first thing we need to do is think about our thesis statement and also decide if we need a description. We decided that we were going to write plants and how plants need pollination in order to reproduce or create their seeds. So when I look at that thesis statement, I go right to the subject and I go to, those are the flowers in a plant that are going to reproduce its seeds. Does my reader need background about a flower, a description of a flower, so they understand what that is in order to comprehend all the information that I tell about pollination? Yes, they need to know the parts of a flower before I can get into pollination. So I need to describe my subject. I will write SS light bulb, and I will draw a line so that I have an area to draw a description. So in my introduction, I'm not just going to have a thesis statement, because I know I'm going to write about a plant and pollination and that the plant's flower needs to be described. I'm going to put a description box here. The next thing I'm going to do is go back and fill in my SS light bulb. This was done in stage 9. There are many steps that you need to go through in order to fill out this thesis statement. I highly suggest that you go back to that stage, watch that video before you go any further with this video. In stage 9, we used our brainstorm to figure out what our essay was going to be about, and we then created a thesis statement. We found our main idea paragraphs in our brainstorm that went together, and we said cross-pollination, self-pollination. We put those together, and then we asked, do those main ideas have to be in order or they don't have to be in order? They don't have to be in order. So we formed our thesis statement by looking at those main ideas and saying they didn't have to be in order. And the didn't have to be in order question that you ask to get up to that thesis statement is, how are those 2 things the same? Pollination and cross-pollination. And they're the same because both of those processes create seeds, fertilize the flowers, fertilize the plants, the flower, and both of them are a type of pollination. So we created our big idea, which is the generalization, the big picture of what all the main ideas are about. And we also had our subject, flowering plants or flowers. We went even further and said a flower is a reproductive structure that holds the male and female organs. At stage 9, we went through this in a very detailed fashion. I've just done a quick review. So our first step is our thesis statement, subject, who or what is the information about, and we said flowers. Then we went to what's the big idea and why is it so important? And we looked at our main ideas and we put them together by saying how are they the same? And they're about pollination. And why is this so important? Because this is how a plant creates its seeds. It's how it fertilizes. It's how it reproduces. And that's very important for the survival of the plant. So we had our subject, big idea. Then we went back and said, is there any specific setting or any setting that we need to put? And we decided we weren't going to add that to this information. It wasn't critical. So we put an X. There we have our thesis statement. We're staying in our introduction because we need a description. Let's go through and draw a flower, label the parts. We went up and we started with a definition in our description, where we have who or what is this about? This description is about a flower. And what about it? What is the big idea that we want to tell about the flower? The flower has reproductive organs. So there is our definition. Then we drew a flower and labeled any of the important parts that we may be describing. We took these important parts here and we told the function of them, that they were the female parts of the reproductive system. We labeled these parts and then we showed the function of them. They're the male parts of the flower. And we added some other words just in case, but we probably weren't going to use those. This is the function of these parts and the function of these. So we went through, we drew a picture, labeled the parts, told the function of the parts, and started with a definition. We have all the information on our planner for our introduction, except for our hook in the reader, and that will be done at the end. Let's go to the next steps in our directions. We will go to the body. The body needs the main idea paragraphs. And are they going to be organized in categories or in a sequence? So I need to look at my main idea paragraphs, and they are cross-pollination and self-pollination. Do those have to go in order? Is there a sequence where they have to go in order? Or they don't have to go in order? How will I organize those main ideas? They don't have to go in order. So that's categories. So we're looking at how many main ideas, self-pollination and cross-pollination. So I have two main idea boxes, and I need to label them with those two main ideas. So in the body of my organizer, what have I done? I've drawn a line in the middle, then I've labeled self-pollination, cross-pollination. These are my two main ideas that are going to be about the thesis statement. And next, we're going to start writing our main ideas. The first thing you need to ask is this: am I just going to tell what the main idea is? And that means I'm going to use my secret formula, S, light bulb. Or do I need a definition? How do I choose from this? Well, I go over and I say, self-pollination, that's my main idea. Does my reader know what self-pollination is? No. Then I'm going to put an equal sign here. I need to give a definition. Let me go to cross-pollination. Does my reader know what cross-pollination is? No. Then I would put an equal sign there. What if the big idea up here was about plants and how they need different things in order to survive? And one of my categories was water. Would I need a definition of water? No. So then I would just use subject, big idea. Subject, main idea. This light bulb here is for the main idea. So I'm just going to tell you what my main idea is. Water is necessary for a plant to survive. That's all I'm doing. Then I'll go into more details about how the plant uses the water, what the plant does with the water. That's my main idea of the sentence. So notice I'm either going to choose from just telling what the main idea is, or I'm going to go into the equal sign, and that is a definition. After deciding on a definition to begin both main ideas, notice I've written out my definitions using simple icons, drawings, and keywords so that I will not copy information. I will actually be able to transfer information that I've learned using my own words. And in order to do that, if you put icons and keywords on an organizer, when students are orally rehearsing this information, they're just taking the information and keywords and making their own sentences instead of writing out an entire definition, and then what are they doing? They're copying. What is self-pollination? One plant fertilizes or produces its own seeds so that the next generation is going to look exactly the same. In cross-pollination, that is when two plants, one fertilizes and one produces the seed. So one plant is going to be the fertilizer, one plant is the seed. And the next generation is going to have more diversity. So we have self-pollination, cross-pollination, and we have a definition of both. So that's going to be our main idea statement using that definition. Next, we need to go into the details, and we have to choose from the details. So let me show you a little memory device that I use to help students think about the details and keep them in this order. My memory device is draw, list and draw, back it up. What's my memory device? Draw, list and draw, back it up. When you're choosing your details, these are your choices. You're either going to write a description. If I'm writing a description of self-pollinization, that means I'm taking usually the subject, one item. There's no other steps, there's no other information, there's just one. So I'm going through labeling the parts and I'm telling the function of the parts. If it's a description, then it's the whole subject. It's parts, the function of the parts, but it's one thing. That's my first memory device. I'm pretending like I'm drawing. That means a description. Or do I need to list and draw? I need to tell more than one thing about self-pollinization. Then I need to go into a list. And when I have my list, I need to decide, do I need to put it in order or it doesn't have to go in order when I list out information about self-pollinization. And also notice it says list and draw. In each part of my list, do I need to describe? So here I am looking at sequencing, categorizing, and describing. It's all embedded in the main idea paragraphs. So the tool that you can use with your students is, let's begin with the main idea sentence. Let's tell about the main idea using S light bulb, subject, and what's my main idea? Or do I need to define it? Do I need a definition? We went back, we looked at each one of our main ideas, and in this case, we decided they needed to be a definition. Next, we need to choose a detail. Are we going to describe it, list and draw it? And when you list and draw, that means that you're going to tell why, tell what about, tell what else, tell how, or when or where about the main idea. And you're putting that in a list that either goes in order or it doesn't have to go in order. And finally, back it up. When you're writing details, you're usually choosing between description and list and draw. Back it up is what you add at the end of a main idea paragraph typically. And that is when you want to back up the information that you've given by giving a real life example or by giving a fact. These facts are what you have found in your research that's a result of the information. So this is a fact that's a result. So it's backing up the information that you gave. Or I could give a quote. Maybe I have an expert that I could quote to back up what I've just given in my information. I could provide numbers, statistics, or an anecdote. And an anecdote is when you have a short story. Usually it's some short, true story to give an example of the information. So these are my choices. First, I'm looking at describe, list, or draw. What's my main idea? Am I going to describe it all on its own, or is this a list and draw? Once I have that information down, then I go back and ask, do I need to back it up? So let's go through and see what we did. Self-pollinization. What information do I need to tell about self-pollinization? I gave you the definition to start it off, that it's one plant fertilizes and produces its own seeds so that the next generation ends up looking exactly the same way. When I look at self-pollinization, I need to give you details now. Well, under self-pollinization, there's two types. So I need to write the two types of self-pollinization. When just one flower self-pollinates itself, or on the same plant, there could be two different flowers, but on the same plant, they pollinate each other. We know that there's two types of self-pollinization. And since there's two of them, I'm not going to describe, I'm going to list. And when I list, do they have to be in order or they don't have to be in order? They don't have to be in order. So we recorded it on our organizer, 1, 2, so we made a list, and we labeled it quickly, 1 flower, 2 flowers. Next, we need to expand on that. Do I need to, in my list, because it's list and draw, do I need to describe this? Do I need to tell why, how, what else, when, where? So we have our 1 flower. And now with 1 flower, I need to explain how that 1 flower self-pollinates. Oh, so I just listed, and it didn't have to be in order, but within my list, I'm going to explain how 1 flower self-pollinates. I'm going into a sequence again, and I'm going to add descriptive words so that I can create a picture for my reader. And I'm going to do the same thing. What am I going to do in my information here? I've listed it out. Well, I'm going to tell how 2 flowers self-pollinate. And when you tell how, what do you have to do? You have to sequence that information. So I drew a picture, making sure that I stick with pictures and simple icons. I labeled the different reproductive parts, and then I discussed how they transfer pollen and they create the same plant. And then I showed with 2 flowers how they are on the same plant, but they transfer the pollen between the flowers, but they still end up with the same plant. So we have our self-pollinization. We started our main idea sentence with a definition, then listed out the details, the 2 types of ways a plant self-pollinates, and then we sequenced out how they do that and described it. We did list or draw. Next, we have to ask, do we need to back it up? Is there anything we need to back it up with? Can I give an example of plants that self-pollinate? I could do that. Could I give a statistic, an anecdote? Maybe a statistic, but not an anecdote. Quote, not really. A fact, yes. In my brainstorm, I have facts that are telling you the results of these flowers self-pollinating. That I'm going to have as my back it up, a fact that is going to tell the results of my information. Let's look at our back it up. I write down the letter B for back it up, and here is my, from a scientist, the facts about, I'm backing up this information here with facts that are a result of these facts. 1 flower, 2 flowers. Let me look at some facts that are going to show the results. Backing up this information, and that is that flowers that use self-pollination don't need to have insects or birds to carry their pollen to a different plant. Oh, so that's going to be, look at the arrow, a benefit. So this is taking the information and telling the result of it, and this is a benefit of self-pollination. Notice I've also added an arrow going down that there's also negatives to this, and that is that when plants reproduce, they lack diversity, and that means that they have difficulty adapting when their environment changes. We have our self-pollinization, our definition, we did our list and draw, and then we backed it up with more facts about this list and draw that shows results. Let's go to cross-pollinization. We need to begin our cross-pollinization with a main idea sentence, and we chose the definition. We could have the tell about it or define it, and we knew that we needed to do a definition because our reader probably doesn't know what cross-pollinization is. Next, we need to choose details. We're going to look at the details that tell about the cross-pollinization. First, we have to ask, are we doing a description or a list and draw for the details about this main idea? This is about how 2 plants cross-pollinate, and there's actually 2 ways that they do that. So this is going to go into the list and draw. We don't have 1. So we're going to write 1 and 2 and label each one of those ways. Before we list those details, do they have to be in order or not in order? They don't have to be in order. The 2 different types of cross-pollinization is when the wind carries pollen or when bees, birds, other animals carry pollen to other plants. So there's 2 types. Do those 2 types, do they not have to go in order or they do have to go in order? They don't have to go in order. So that's our categories. We're just going to list them to the 2 different types of cross-pollinization. So we write down the number 1 with wind, and number 2 we're going to write down animals. I labeled wind and animal. I have to tell how the wind is going to cross-pollinate, how the animals cross-pollinate, and I'll add descriptions. Let's look at that. Here's our wind, showing how the wind blows a plant, the pollen flies through the air, and a long stigma from another flower is picking up that pollen in order to create seeds. Those plants, they don't need to have much smell or scent because they just rely on the wind. Let's look at the second type of cross-pollinization. This is when birds, bees, different types of animals, butterflies are attracted to bright, colorful flowers with sweet scents so that they can go land on their large petals and drink their nectar. They will carry the pollen from one of those flowers to another flower that they drink nectar, hence transferring the pollen. After we went through described and explained how wind and animals are going to cross-pollinate a flower, then we needed to back it up. Just like we showed the results of self-pollination, what's the results of cross-pollination? The negatives are they need these insects and animals to cross-pollinate. So if an area is depleted in them, they won't be able to reproduce. But because they are cross-pollinating, they have great diversity, and the strength is that they can easily adapt when their environment changes. We've finished our main idea paragraphs. Next, we'll go to the conclusion. We now go to our conclusion, and the first thing we need to do is repeat the thesis statement, but use different words. So I need to write my secret formula, S light bulb. This way I can isolate different parts of the thesis statement. I'm not going to add setting, even though there wasn't a setting. Our secret formula for the conclusion is subject, light bulb. We're just repeating the subject and the big idea. So I go to the subject, and it's easier to use the secret formula because I can isolate the parts of the thesis statement. So I look down here and say, okay, the first part I need is the subject. So I go back up to the thesis, and I look at the subject. Who or what is this about? Flowering plants, flowers. And I'm going to probably start with just the word flowers up here. So maybe down here I'll put flowering plants. And then I go up to the big idea. And what's my big idea about? What information did I tell about flowering plants? So I go up and I see create seeds, fertilizes. So I look at that and I say, what's another way I could do that? Oh, maybe reproduces. And pollination. Maybe I could label out cross-pollination and self-pollination. So let's see what we did. So in our conclusion, we have flowering plants reproduce the seeds in a process called pollination, which creates a wide variety of flowers that can easily adapt, or flowers that can reproduce themselves without the help of pollinators. We repeated our big idea, and we added maybe a little bit of other information that we learned from the body here as well, but we're repeating that big idea, that thesis statement, at the beginning of our conclusion. So we have our introduction, body, and conclusion filled in on our organizer. Next, we need to go back and plan how to begin this organizer with a hook and how to end this paper with a snappy ending. And that we're going to do on a separate sheet of paper. Let's go to page 188 for some helpful ideas for students to craft their hooks and their snappy endings. First, I highly suggest that they grab a separate sheet of paper. On the paper, they write hook and they write snap. Or they draw a hook and they draw an asterisk for the snap. First, they start off with the hook. I have a helper page for just that, for writing hooks. And I have the kids go through this process on this page. First thing they have to do is go back to the big idea, the thesis statement, and ask, what am I doing in this paper? What am I telling about, explaining, or describing? What am I doing when it comes to the big idea? Well, we're talking about how flowers reproduce through self-pollination. So we are telling about, reporting, and explaining how they do that. So that reminds you what your big idea is. That's where we're getting to, is how flowers create their seeds through a process called pollination. The next part here, which says theme or message, is not something that you have to do, but I found it very helpful. When kids identify what their big idea is, the thesis statement, and then they start making a hook, many times what they do is they say their thesis statement in their hook, and we don't want to do that. But yet we want them to go together. What I suggest that you do to help them stay within that realm of understanding of that thesis statement, but not introduce it in the hook, is to talk about a theme or a message. When we're looking at the information about how a flower reproduces itself, what understanding about the world and how the world works, what sort of message or theme can we come up with when we look at this thesis statement? So when we look at it, we're saying plants produce their seeds through pollination. The idea of adaptation, survival, diversity, when we look at all that information that we were telling about, those three come up right away. So maybe I could form a hook where I could talk about diversity. or I could talk about survival or adaptation. It helps remove me from the exact thesis statement and puts it out into more of a broader or general type of observation. And that's how you get to that general observation, by using a theme or message that your information is telling about. So we identified our big idea, then we went to a theme or message. I have many different stems listed on this paper. They're just a way to help kids start writing a hook. Sometimes they just need a few words, their idea, and then they can start creating it. These are some different clever hooks, different stems that can start a hook that have a little style and creativity to them. I also want to go back and I want to show you that you see in this box where it's a theme or a message is the face, the emotion faces. I also want the children to think about, when I pull the reader in for my hook, what emotion do I want? Do I want them to be happy, sad, angry, scared? Is that going to pull them in? Do I want to create some sort of curiosity? Are they going to become curious? So when I look at a hook, I'm trying to think of a message I want to get across and what sort of an emotion. So in this case, I want them to become curious. I want them to know more about the plants, because we're talking about something that has a lot of diversity, something that has the ability to adapt, something that can survive in many different environments. Wow, that's interesting. Let's pique their interest. Let's get them interested in this. My hook will deal with those different themes, but also thinking about trying to get my reader's curiosity. Maybe I could start with an interjection. I could start with, impossible. Why do flowers have so many different ways to reproduce? There, I could do that. Why do flowers have so many different ways that they can adapt? Impossible. How can a flower reproduce in different ways so it can adapt to its environment? I could look at the theme of diversity, and maybe I could use a riddle to pull in the reader's curiosity. So I could use my riddle frame, and I could say something like, what comes in many colors, sizes, shapes, and smells, but you can call them the same thing? Did you guess? The answer is flowers. And then you can continue on with, these plants have so many different parts that many times are beautiful, but that diversity is there for their own survival. So I'm looking at these ideas, I'm using the sentence frames, and I'm trying to come up with a hook. Notice here we used the stem unbelievable. And when we used unbelievable, we wanted to pull our reader in to get more curiosity. So we added 90% of the plant kingdom is made up of flowering plants. We added that statistic to pull in the reader. Wow, that's a high percentage. They may be beautiful and many have fragrant smells, but why is this part of a plant so important to these living things? That's hooking the reader in, giving a general observation so that you can pique their curiosity, so that you can have them feel some sort of an emotion, but also so that you can give them that observation of some basic information or ideas that will lead to the thesis statement. Let's go to the snap. I have a snappy ending page. In our snappy ending, the first thing we do is always go back to, because we want to try to connect the style of the hook and the snappy ending. So go back to the hook and read the hook. And we started off with unbelievable. We went into 90% of the plants and talked about how they're beautiful, but how really the flower is an important part of the plant for another reason. Then we went to our snap, and we used that word unbelievable, and we said, can you believe it? So that's how we connected it together. So I have my snappy ending. That's where I'm ending my paper. So I need to, in a snappy ending, not only connect it back up to the hook, but I want to leave my reader with a new idea, a different point of view, a new perspective, a new understanding, or some sort of an emotion. In this case, I thought, oh, a new idea, something different after reading this information about a flower reproducing its seeds. So I'm looking at connecting my snappy ending back up to my hook, trying to have that same type of style, but I also want to end it with some sort of a new observation or idea or thinking, perspective, or an emotion. And I can look at my starter words here, any of these stems, to help me with that. So I thought, I think I'm just going to go back up to unbelievable and just write, can you believe it? And talk about a new perspective and talk about a new understanding, maybe something new that you never thought of before. And that is, after reading all this information, we found out that plants are beautiful and fragrant because it increases their chances to produce seeds. Not all, but many plants are beautiful and fragrant to help enhance their chances to produce seeds. Why don't we end with a rhetorical question? Who would ever think humans had so much in common with the plant kingdom? So in other words, to reproduce, have beauty and have a fragrance and a beauty, and saying, oh, look, the plant kingdom and humans have many things in common there. So it's just kind of a funny, clever ending, and it's ending the reader with a new idea, something that's different, some sort of new learning or new understanding perspective. And in this case, it was just looking at, humans and plants, they have something similar in common with each other. That is that many times looking at beauty and smell is part of reproducing. So we have our hook and we have our snappy ending. And we then would take this paper, put it next to our organizer, and orally rehearse all the parts. Talk it out the way we're going to write it. Once it sounds pretty good, then we can go back and write out our essays. We're going to orally rehearse our organizer. We're going to write out our entire paper, revise it. We have a whole revising and editing chapter so that when your students finish writing their papers, they can go back and revise and edit the parts. I highly suggest you go to those videos to see what they do at that point. But to wrap this up, let's go to page 189 so that we can look at graphics. Planned out our entire organizer, went back, planned our hook and snappy ending, wrote out the paper. Once we've written out the paper and we were editing and drafting it, when we're publishing this piece of writing, do we need to insert any graphics anywhere in this text? From what we wrote out, we felt that a diagram of the parts of a flower were necessary. We used a lot of the vocabulary, and we also started describing those parts of the flower. So a reader would need to have a diagram of it to help them in creating that visual, that description that we're giving of a flower, as well as understanding those vocabulary words. We drew out a diagram, and then when we went to publish our piece of writing, we put that in to our piece of writing. You have your graphic helper pages to look at the types of graphics that you could choose from to help your reader with that comprehension. Let's go to the next page to see the finished product. Here is a finished Stage 10 essay, and it's entitled Flower Power. Notice it's going to have 2 paragraphs for the introduction. That's because we had a description. So paragraph 1 ended up becoming the hook. Paragraph 2 starts with the thesis statement. So there's our thesis, S light bulb. And we ended up having just S light bulb. Then all the sentences after that, for the remaining part of that paragraph, was a description. And notice we inserted the graphic right after the description. So when you have 2 paragraphs in your introduction, it's because you had to add a description. So where do you paragraph? You have a hook as 1 paragraph, and your second paragraph begins with the thesis statement and the description. What if we didn't need a description? Then you could just have 1 paragraph. Start with the hook and end the paragraph with your thesis statement. Let's go to the next part of our paper. We have our body, and then at the bottom, our conclusion. And we had 2 boxes, 2 main idea boxes. So we have our 2 main ideas. So we have 2, so we've indented for each one of those main idea boxes. We have our main ideas starting off each one of our paragraphs in our body with the detailed sentences after. And finally, we have our conclusion. Our conclusion is going to repeat that thesis statement. It may just be 1 or it could be a couple of sentences. In this case, we used a couple of sentences. And we also then ended it with a snappy ending. So notice you can go back, and this is part of the revising process, circle and label the parts to make sure you have all those elements in there. This is your Stage 10 informative explanatory essay. So there's many different directions that you can take this in. I suggest that you use all of these different techniques because when your students are writing, they need to write on demand and they need to write in the writing process. This is the end of our Stage 10. Our final destination to write an essay that is purely information, where you inform, describe, or explain. That's at that knowledge level when you think of Bloom's taxonomy, that level where you're reporting, informing your reader about the information. The next stage and final stage in informative explanatory writing will be stage 11. That's where we're heading into a deep analysis of information. And we're going to use compare, contrast, and cause and effect as our thinking structures to help students get to that deep analysis. Let's go to stage 11 in order to guide students to those deep levels of thinking.